3, 2, 1. How often do you think about the Oscars? About how many Oscar-winning films there are and how many you've seen? Yeah, there's a few famous Oscar-winning films that we've all seen. You know, The Godfather and Lord of the Rings and Titanic, I'm King of the World, all that stuff. But the Oscars have been running since 1927. There are currently over 1,000 films, feature-length films, which have won an Oscar. How many have you seen? I did the numbers for myself. It's not many, and I consider myself quite a movie buff. So here then is the premise of this podcast. Every episode, I and a rotating cast of 2 guests will randomly select one of the 1,000 films that have won an Oscar, watch it, and talk about it, with the only requirement being that one of the 3 people on each episode has to have never seen the movie before we talk about it. That will get difficult with Star Wars. Please note that our coverage of a movie does not constitute an endorsement of it. My least favorite movie of 2016, David Ayer's Suicide Squad, won an Oscar for Best Makeup, while my favorite movie of 2016, The Handmaiden, wasn't even nominated for anything. Please also note that our coverage of a movie is not a blanket endorsement of any or all of the people involved in it. A lot of terrible people have won Oscars. Kevin Spacey won an Oscar 20 years before he was outed as an abuser, and Roman Polanski won one 20 years after. But every film, good, bad, or in many cases mediocre, that has won an Oscar is an important part of film history just for being there. And they all, on some level, deserve a tiny bit of consideration, even if that consideration ends up concluding that it's garbage. And with all of that in mind, I am your host, as always, Ellie McConaughey, and with me today is Jasmine Garcia.
Writers everywhere. Can we please stop doing oppression cosplays for the sake of our writing? I promise you we don't have to.
And joining us for the first time ever is Xandy Peters.
Hi. I'm actually right above Ellie. I don't know if she knows this, but I am actually following her right now and stalking her in her own house.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Xandy is, in fact, in my own house. And we are here, unironic statement, but stated ironically. And we are here today to talk about Gentleman's Agreement, the 1947 film that won Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Supporting Actress at the 20th Academy Awards. And I kind of hinted at the end of the last episode that I and another guest would have kind of a personal relationship to this movie. So this movie is about investigating antisemitism in New York and Darien, Connecticut, and they also briefly name drop New Canaan. And for those of you who don't know, I went to high school in New Canaan. I lived in Darien for several years, and Xandy grew up in New Canaan and is also Jewish. So I thought that's the main reason I picked it. I gave up Barry Lyndon on the schedule for this movie.
Was it worth it?
Nothing's ever worth Barry Lyndon. Just thinking about Barry Lyndon now. So, yeah, the premise of this film's a Gentile writer decides to investigate anti-Semitism by pretending to be Jewish.
And the sad thing is, it is actually still very relevant. Because just last year, there was a Canadian journalist who did blackface in some wrong-headed attempt to discuss race in America.
See, I thought that you were going for Connecticut had the largest number of anti-Semitic crimes per capita of any state in the country.
It's relevant for multiple reasons.
We did? Ah, Christ.
And not to mention the whole running theme of how all it takes is the good people doing nothing for bigotry to grow.
I mean, I will say, we've covered several films on racism, and we will continue to. It's a theme the Oscars fucking love. Though they usually pick Gentlemen's Agreements and Green Books and not, Black Klansmen's or Sorry to Bother Yous. But it did strike me, this film is more sophisticated about how it talks about bigotry than, like, Green Book.
Well, sure.
Which came out 7 years ago. I'm old.
Aye.
But I think it's important to remember people aren't any more like sophisticated now than they were then. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we need more complex themes in movies that are going to reach the general public. The general public is still like unversed, you know?
Mm.
The general public does, in fact, need the Feminism 101 of Barbie.
Yeah.
Every so often I chat with some of my friends about like how a lot of the modern right wing movement can be, a sentence physically harms me, traced back to Gamergate. And then you go back and you look at the stuff that happened in that, and it was just like you were mad because someone said like, "Here's feminism for high schoolers applied to video games," and
Yeah,
I'm so tired.
I'm so tired. Because, yeah, this movie kind of just made it so abundantly clear of how very little has changed in the nearly 80 years since it dropped.
Hmm. I was quite amused by the like the final scene with the mom where she basically like, I mean, I don't want to put it this way, but it is functionally what she's saying, that like, man, your article could end bigotry forever. And by extension, the movie about this story could end bigotry forever. And I'm just sitting here 80 years in the future going, shut up. Shut the fuck up.
It's a very monologue-y movie, very tell not show, which is not inherently bad. It can work in a movie like this. It's just, it's very self important.
Mm-hmm.
And in spite of the good intentions, it is fucking inescapable that most of the bigotry on the screen is aimed towards someone pretending to be Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of makes it hard to connect with it.
It's kind of someone pretending to be Jewish, but I think that it's important. Ellie and I had this conversation yesterday. I think it's important to recognize how good a job they did at explaining in the beginning, like, you can be all of these things and American, you can be all of these things and whatever. And one of the things about being Jewish is there is no way that you can look or act or be that's like 100% true, because it's not the same kind of thing as like a, like, you know,
Mhm.
linguistic divide or a racial divide. It's like specifically something without a look to it.
No, for sure.
So the actor, when he looks at himself in the mirror and says, "Well, I have dark hair and dark eyes," he probably already had lost opportunity. Like, I know it's Gregory Peck, right? But like, theoretically, someone who looked like that around that time already was missing out on opportunities for looking too Jewish, too Greek, too Italian, too, you know, whatever, in ways that we don't think matters now because we've gotten somewhat better about that. But it is not as weird as pretending to be a different race where you have to like put on blackface,
Mm-hmm.
because people make assumptions all the time,
Mhm.
because there is no, like, unless you're wearing like a specific garment or symbol, like there's no way of telling.
And that's fair.
There's a moment in the X-Files episode on anti-Semitism where Mulder basically like talks shit to a Nazi, and the Nazi instantly swaps over to believing that he's Jewish, which I think sort of like, if even though Mulder is not, although David Duchovny is, I think.
Yes, he is.
Okay, the point I think that makes, and is that like these, much like white is a term without like a coherent meaning so much as it means like whatever is convenient for the in group to be at that moment. This is a term that can be applied as an attack to people who aren't necessarily under it to begin with. Does that make sense?
Unfortunately, yeah, I actually did once get. I once had a student that assumed that I was Jewish because I didn't care for the fact he jokingly did a Nazi salute during the pledge.
Ah, fuck me.
Yeah. Yeah, did I mention my teaching years were hell?
Matt Stone and Trey Parker have so much to fucking answer for, I swear to God.
They really do.
No, so like there is a scene right at the beginning. Zandy already mentioned it, where like they do a sort of like anti-Semitism for literal children said to a literal child, and like it's one of those things that tried to like, okay, this is obviously redundant for me, but like trying to step outside of that and like put myself, okay, it's 1947, much like previous episode Miracle on 34th Street. World War II kind of hangs over this entire film in a way that I don't even know how to like explain without just being like, you just got to watch it, man.
Yeah, if you were under the misapprehension that after we found out what was going on overseas, anti Semitism was over in this country, boy, do I have bad news for you.
I mean, more than that, it's also just a film that is very, how do I put this? I don't want to say like locked into its time period. I mean, every film is going to be locked into its time period just because of the way just because of the way they're made. But this one is very specifically, there are references to stuff going on in 1947. They repeatedly reference a far right clergy guy named Gerald L.K. Smith, who was like apparently just like who has been more or less completely forgotten by modern history. I seem to recall him coming up in a book I read on the America First movement. But like they bring him up, they never explain who he is. They just expect the audience to know who that is. And I had to go like look him up and figure out who he was and what his deal was. He was a Nazi.
Of course he was.
I hope he's burning in hell.
If there is one, yeah.
But like in that context, I guess I can sort of see like wanting to do a really basic primer on anti-Semitism to be like, hey guys, we just saw where this leads, and even though they never like say it out loud, again, it's kind of there. There's a scene at the dinner where the character who is actually Jewish gets harassed. He first gets harassed for being a commanding officer and then for being Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
So like they don't let you forget that World War II was a thing that just happened.
Well, I think that one of the things that was also interesting about them referencing the guy that you were talking about, LK, what was his name?
Gerald L.K. Smith.
Gerald LK Smith. Like they keep saying that name, and like it's really apparent who he is from context clues, obviously. But also, I think that around that time, because the war was just over, there was probably a little window where they could reach people with a movie like this who had previously listened to this guy who was, I don't know like specifically too much about him, but I do know a little bit, like a Wikipedia level overview from yesterday. But people who might have listened to this before the war and been like, well, I don't know if it's really that bad or harmful to think this way. And maybe return from the war knowing a little bit more about why it was, and they could finally reach that person and show them that there was an alternative way to act, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that it does have a weird, eerie, similar feel to some things that were happening in 2020 with people talking about anti-racism and things like that, like ways to reach people who would have previously been like, well, I don't understand why that was wrong, you know. And so that is like, it's hard, I think, when you're viewing a movie so long after the war to think of it as someone would have. But
Mm-hmm.
things happened in World War II with the troops being mixed, involving race and acceptance. Like US soldiers in Britain who were stationed in England were desegregated, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
some of the Americans fought for segregation in England because of their military bases having a sort of mixed race environment that white GIs were not accustomed to and did not like. So like some things happened, I think, that did possibly open up a window for change there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that he's not necessarily like immune to being assumed to be Jewish, which is apparently what inspired Elia Kazan, who is not Jewish, who was not Jewish, to do the film. Because something like he was from Turkey, which unfortunately means that his Wikipedia page says that he was from Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. So every time I read it, my brain starts playing "They Might Be Giants."
Yeah, of course it does.
Istanbul. Apparently, yes, he got like denied entry to a country club or something because they like looked at him and went like, "Oh, you're Jewish." No.
Unfortunate news for him. They could have also looked at him and been like, "You're Turkish, you can't come in," because they were doing that. I don't like they were doing that. Sometimes, not all the time, but
So basically, either way, he would have been fucked.
Yeah. No, but it's just like it's one of those things that is complicated because like you Jazz chatting about it, we're very down on the film, and I'm like having trouble not being down on the film. But like there are moments where I think it like really hits. Like there's a moment towards the end of
Hmm.
the movie where they're at the hotel and he's being denied a room because they think that he's Jewish. He's acting like he's Jewish. But they also won't like say that. They'll like talk around it. And it genuinely reminded me of a moment where I was like, I was emailing a job recruiter back and forth. We were having good conversation. I had go for the in-person interview. I walk in and she clocks me as trans, just like, and I'm just like, I could walk out of here right now and have the same chance of getting this job. And it's just like, there's just this impotent rage that you feel because you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, we don't have time to try to reach somebody who might not be reachable.
It's not even someone who might not be reachable. Go ahead, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just like I do see your point. Like again, this movie clearly has really good intentions and has really good things to say. I just could not stop thinking, okay, listen, you want me to be on this guy's side and he's saying pretty much all the right stuff. But whether it was for the sake of his article or not, it's just still rubbed me the wrong way, especially the way he was lecturing one of his coworkers about it.
Yeah, the scenes with his secretary, who is Jewish but is also kind of like has a lot of internalized self hatred. They hit kind of weird.
Yeah, and but that's not for him to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
is it?
What do you think?
Like, why is it not for him to deal with?
I just feel like, well, yes, internalized bigotry is very real and stuff, but when someone who is from another group is trying to lecture a more oppressed person on that, it just comes off very savory.
I can see that. Yeah.
I don't get it because, first of all, a lot of people had Polish names. I didn't even pick up on the fact that she was implying that she was actually Jewish until it was implied again later, because I thought that she was just Polish and didn't want to be seen as Jewish, which is how the Polish side of my family was in that generation. They
Mm.
didn't want that association because that was such a common association. And so I thought that was interesting. And in that sense, it's not really a conversation the way that I viewed that. It was not a conversation between a Gentile and a Jew, it was between two white passing people.
I guess it should be noted, like from my perspective, I'm actually half Dominican, and there are definitely people in my family who have some internalized shit going on. If a white person tried to lecture them on it, I'd deck them in the face. Because, no,
Mm-hmm.
you don't get to come here all white saviory about this, okay? You don't get to act all high and mighty when the culture that favors you is at fault for this.
I guess. I mean, like it's just like how do I put this in a way that makes sense? There's a lot about the film that I like. Maybe I'd be a lot more generous if it weren't for Kathy.
I warmed up to Kathy's arc if only because I realized where it was going by the end. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, she annoyed the shit out of me up until the very end.
I actually thought the most like white savory thing that the movie did was redeeming her character.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like it was talking about something like he wasn't stepping out of line earlier as much as it was weird that she had like a positive outcome, if that makes
I can
sense.
see that. No, it definitely makes sense. The way I kind of saw it is because it really does make a point how it doesn't actually matter how well intentioned you are. You actually have to do something about it, which unfortunately is something a lot of people need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks that it had to be Dave to do it, but
I think that the we are in a time of some fairly extreme bigotry in America, and like people have asked me as a trans person what they can do to like help push back against that without like you know redacted by the FBI. And the the answer I usually give is something a little similar to what happens here. You know, she tells the story about how this guy at a party told a joke that was really racist, and she just sort of like what she says she was sickened by it, and the Jewish guy says like, "Yeah, but what'd you do about it?" And the answer is nothing. She did nothing. And the thing I've told a lot of cis people, and I will still tell a lot of cis people, if you're a cis person listening to this and you hear someone make a really transphobic joke, the best thing you can do is that's a really fucking weird thing to say, man. Like, don't let it pass unnoticed. They are and I think that a movie saying in 47 bigots take permission from your silence.
Mm-hmm.
I was genuinely surprised they went that far.
I mean, that's the thing. That's not a message that's really that radical. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's been suppressed over the years by people who don't want bigotry to die in a hole where it belongs.
it it is striking that we did this movie after God. Is it really like the same? No, it was Green Book was 2018.
Yeah,
I don't fucking remember. Unwatchable movie.
yeah, something like that.
So nearly exactly 70 years after this, another movie won about racism that is best picture for that is significantly less sophisticated about it, I guess is the term. Significantly more cartoonish, more childish. I don't know, like I don't know if I'm just like being overly generous because I want to be, or because I was sitting here in my bed watching the movie and they pull up to the train station. Both me and Xandy kind of sat forward and like pointed at the screen like Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh.
It's literally the same. I mean, they renovated it, what, 5 years ago? But
Yeah,
it was clearly the correct train station, and so that was kind of fun.
it's the parking lot.
But I just, for a second, want to circle back to the, like, silence and bigotry and the whole, like, who's lecturing whom in this movie. And I want to say that the weirdest, least believable part of it for me was that, like, I knew it had to be written by someone Jewish because I know from people's stories that if you're not Jewish, you know that all this stuff happens because you have sat there and listened to it said in front of you, like as if you would agree with it. And I think that we've all been in that situation for some group of people that we're not part of, where you're sitting with a group of people and they're saying something and you're like, oh, that's weird. Why are you saying that? You know? And so I thought it was strange that the movie was like, the main female character hears these jokes said around her because they know that she's not Jewish. But the guy with dark hair and dark eyes has not heard those things said around him because he's in this weird space of like, he might actually be one of them, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does.
And like, I don't know who wrote the screenplay.
The screenplay was written by Elia Kazan himself and Moss Hart, who was Jewish, and who, among other things, notably wrote the 1954 version of A Star Is Born.
Okay.
He also apparently directed the original run of My Fair Lady on
Oh,
Broadway. So busy guy.
clearly very prolific.
Are you sure that the movie was if are you sure this story was written by a non-Jewish person?
The screenplay was originally written by Moss Hart, and it was revised by Elia Kazan. Moss Hart, it was Jewish, so yes, it was written by a Jewish person. Is what I'm saying.
Okay. Oh, so he just revised. Okay, the director guy just revised it.
Yeah, I I was trying to like make a point about how Elia Kazan, he probably got mistaken for Jewish a lot. Was I guess my point.
Um. Yeah. No. He probably did.
Mm-hmm. I totally lost track of what my point was. Oh well.
Like, and like, if you've talked to anyone who is old enough, you know that in the '60s they didn't really care if you were Jewish. It was enough to look like it, and like they didn't really care if you were Italian. It was enough to look like it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Which is fair. That's very fair. But as you pointed out, he really only began to experience this sort of thing after he started saying he was Jewish again for the sake of the article he was trying to write. And it's just the fact that they established from the very beginning he had a Jewish friend. And I get I kind of get the impulse to not ask, but it's just like I feel like your experiences as somebody who is not from that group is not nearly as valuable as uplifting the voices of the very people you're trying to stand up for.
So, so my feeling about it was not so much. Ellie was sitting next to me while we watched it, and I was like, I don't know how his friend's going to feel about this when he's talking about, you know, I'll just pretend to be Jewish. But then I was thinking about it, and it's the reason that why did this article at the end of the movie get so much recognition when we know that this was a topic that had been written about extensively, right? In universe, and we just know from history that this was not like something like the word anti-Semitism had just been coined, right? They still at some points in the movie don't say the word anti-Semitism because in the U.S. up until when Hitler was on the rise and they invented that word, had just called it Jew hate, right? And they said that a few times. But the point I think that they're trying to make with this movie is that the only person that can sometimes break through to an audience that does not inherently care about this minority group is someone who's not part of that group.
It also struck me, and this is probably, if I had to guess, the influence of the Jewish writer. There are several scenes where like he will chat about it with Jewish people, and they'll basically say like, you get used to it. It just sort of like I'm trying to remember. I think it's Anne who says, oh, you were faking. That explains why you could put so much energy into it.
Yeah,
And like that kind of struck me about it because like, you know, if I were to write an art, I'm very tired of cis people writing articles about trans people's issues. Not gonna lie, it's old. It's old. But if they were writing an article about transphobia, I feel like my fear would always be that it's so extremely easy for transphobes to write off, to just sort of like portray anything I say about my experiences as just me being a crazy trans person. And I do think there's value in allies writing it. I just like it's not cut and dry, but also like I don't know. I like the scene where he basically says like, no, I can't call my friend up and ask him like, hey, what's it like enduring bigotry all the time? I just wish he'd taken it someplace else.
Basically, yeah. Like, it's not like there had to have been a secret third option.
so, but here's where it's really similar to how people talk about trans issues, right? What do we really ask from people when they're called out when they're getting stuff on social media, like bigoted comments asking whether they're trans or saying that they're trans? We ask those people not to say, oh no, not me. We ask those people to say, does it matter? Which is basically the same thing as them saying, like, I am trans. Like, even if they're not, you know what I mean? Like, they're not lying, but it's still allowing people to think that they could be. Because otherwise, it's kind of weird to get that defensive about something that you're not supposed to not want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the response that we ask from people because it's one of those situations where you don't know, you cannot tell whether someone is or isn't just from looking at them a lot of the time, right? So it is kind of annoying when you're in it to not be able to get through to people, but sometimes what people need to see is that the first step is them just literally caring what the other person thinks, and if they don't care about that minority or how they think or feel, they just don't like it doesn't register at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to just say, Ellie, while I was being really quiet and you were talking, I did look it up. This was not originally a screenplay. This was a novel.
Oh.
This movie. It was written by a lady named, hold on, Laura Z. Hobson.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yep, that is true. It is. And the novel was released the same year, right?
Yes. Which is why I don't want to say more because I just have an article on my phone and I haven't like read into it.
According to Wikipedia, she was Jewish. Yeah. She was also Jewish. Yeah.
Well, that's obvious because if she weren't, she would have known that just by having dark hair and dark eyes, people just assume that and said stuff. But yeah, like there are some people who are going to be open. There are always going to be people who are open to hearing the first time they hear like someone say, "Actually, that offended me. That's not cool." They're going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Like, how do I do better?" And then there are the other group of people who you cannot reach until they get to the point where they at least see this other group as human.
I mean, like one of the things that I was expecting the movie to be more about macro aggressions, but I joked in my notes that like the title film should be retitled Gregory Peck Experiences Microaggressions.
I mean, yeah.
Because it's a lot less about like the big, you know, horrifying moments and more like just like how do I what's a good example, like I really liked, and I'm going to start using this regularly, from Anne who rocks, we'll talk about Anne later, is the bit where, you know, a guy comes up to Gregory Peck, instead of like he's not like being overtly hateful, but he's being kind of shitty, and he says, "Hey, I didn't mean anything by it. Some of my best friends are," and Anne sort of cuts him off with, "Yeah, some of your best friends are Methodists too, but you never bring them up."
Anne is pretty great. And for what it's worth, Gregory Peck is great in this movie. I mean, he's
Mm-hmm.
I've yet to see a bad performance from him, honestly.
I was just say, like, Gregory Peck gives good performance. Water is wet.
Yeah, that man can do a speech.
And Anne is the only actor from this movie to win her Oscar. By the way, the entire cast got up there, including the mom. Believe it or not.
No comment.
But the Anne was the only one who actually got to the finish line.
That's so fair. That's so valid.
I thought the kid was pretty good.
Kid was pretty fun. Kid did not get nominated. I over promised. He didn't make it.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, no, the kid was a solid child actor, even though I will say, like, the kind of exposition dump in the beginning was a little awkward, but pretty smooth sailing otherwise.
They did a really good job though at making it. Everything the kid said was believable.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very believable about how children are just confused by all of this stuff. And then they say, I think that it wasn't just exposition, it was foreshadowing when they then say, like, aren't you glad that, like, basically, like, you're a product of parents who cared and your kid will be too?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the theme of the movie, is that the main, is it Kathy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She was not ill-intentioned, but she was a product of the environment in which she was raised. So I thought that wasn't just there for exposition purposes, but that was there to foreshadow, like, there will be the main conflict will be with someone like this.
Mm-hmm. It's you mentioned earlier that like what like the response we usually like to see when someone is accused of being trans is like Katie O'Brien's wife did this on Twitter, when people were like, "Is Katie trans?" or Lady Gaga's a really excellent example where, you know, she got asked in an interview with, I think, like Keith Olbermann or someone famous.
Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper. Okay, are you transgender? And she said, well, "Who cares? So what if I was? Would it be
Yep.
so terrible?"
Mm-hmm.
And like that's a good point that we're asking people to do that, because like they do make a point of when Gregory Peck's son, I should remember these names, Phil's son gets harassed for his dad for being Jewish, essentially. Kathy immediately goes to, "No, it's okay, you're not," and it's just like, oh.
Yeah, no, my jaw drew up. There's like, are you kidding me?
She gets so but my real problem with Kathy, and this is just because this is something I've experienced a lot, is like it's not that she fucks up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like to bring it back to the bigotry that I experience. It's not that someone misgenders me. That's fine. People do that all the time. I misgender me sometimes. It's when someone gets like hyper defensive when I correct them that I'm like, shut the fuck up, man. And that's my opinion. Shut the fuck up, Kathy.
I did not buy into their relationship at all. Like 1 minute they're saying how much they love each other, the next minute they were at each other's throats over very serious, like clearly moral distance between them, and it's just like, why are you together?
Mary Ann, she's better. She was like proposing at the end.
She was.
I choose to believe that hug that they have in the final shot is a hug goodbye. I choose to believe that
Headcanon accepted, honestly.
Phil deserves better.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, so does Anne.
Mm-hmm.
We should probably talk about a little bit about the New Canaan and Darien connection, because Xandy pointed out something interesting about what they say about that.
So I did notice that they said New Canaan's worse than Darien, but having gone through the school system and having some family history on this, so like my family moved to New Canaan in the 60s. I think it was like 1961. The Jewish side of my family, that is. And when they moved, they couldn't get a loan to buy a house. And I had a discussion with my mother a while ago, like, did you know why that was, that a bank wouldn't lend to you? Because my grandparents apparently said they just couldn't get it together, but I don't believe that, nor do I believe that they were that stupid. I think that they just told their kids the loan, they went to a private lender instead of a bank. So the whole area was redlined. You couldn't get a home loan if you were Jewish or if you were black. But in the 60s, not the 40s, but by the 60s, those things were becoming possible in towns like New Canaan, but still not possible in a town like Darien, where those rules stayed in place a lot longer. Actually, Ellie and I are doing this podcast right from a neighborhood that was originally restricted.
Mm-hmm.
So, and is now mostly, ironically, Orthodox Jewish. So there were like specific ways that they carved up the land so that they could keep those towns from having people move in. So the weirdest part of the movie was like they keep getting rejected for the friend keeps getting rejected to find a place to live with his family in New York. Apparently, he didn't think of the outer boroughs. Instead, he's going to try and move into a cottage in Darien, where the law on the books literally says that it was against the law. Like it was not okay. Darien, by the time Ellie and I were in high school,
like people were still referencing, they were still referencing Auntie Mame, the an Aryan from Darien when we were in high school.
But because my nephew went through Darien public school system and did not have one Jewish kid in his public school class, which was not at all the same as the experience that Ellie and I had in New Canaan, which is a neighboring town which was mentioned as much worse. What it said to me was, I don't know if it was subtext, but to me it was like, if you're in the know, you know that she's just making excuses.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no way that, the town that still has serious issues with this stuff happens to be the one that the character is from, where she's saying, oh, but we're not that bad. The other guys are worse. When the other guys were letting people into the town, And that's not to say that there were no problems, but like, it literally is, I think Darien literally is one of the only known sundown towns in Connecticut.
I had not heard that one, but I can't. That's not.
You haven't heard that it was?
No, I haven't heard that it was.
Oh.
But that doesn't mean anything. Don't take that as gospel, any listeners.
I will give this as my citation because it's not actual proof, but I said once in a TikTok that I made that Darien wasn't a sundown town, and people said that it was just like really bigoted, and people were like, you are in fact wrong. And I was like, okay, I am in fact wrong.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just lightly distressed that, like, thinking about movies shot in our part of Connecticut, and it's like The Ice Storm, this, Stepford Wives. It's just like, okay, I see how people see us.
Nothing but bad times there.
Nothing but bad times here. Bummer. Moving on.
Yeah.
Okay. The original novel apparently is a little harsher about whether Darien is or isn't a sundown town.
Mm-hmm.
But when I searched whether it was, it came up on Wikipedia, and there were 3 or 4 citations that it was.
Oh boy.
After, and so it doesn't really matter if I find them and click on them. I'm like,
it's something they know.
I can see it does have citations.
Oh dear.
I lived there for for like 4 years. Ideal.
Yeah, and Ellie, just as some history, the neighborhood that we were in when Darien and New Canaan split off so that they could restrict their towns, the neighborhood that we live in now was the only place in, like, we live in the city of Stanford, was one of the only restricted neighborhoods that remained after those two split off from Stanford.
You can't see me right now because you're in a different room, but I have like the 1,000-yard stare at the wall right now. It's like, "Hello, darkness, my old friend."
Oh dear.
Yeah, it says here, Darien resident Harry Letterman was Grand Dragon in the state
Christ.
in the peak of the Klan in Connecticut's time.
Oh, great.
So that's it for the show as a whole. I'm gonna go walk into Long Island Sound. Bye, everybody.
Oh dear. Yeah, that again, this movie is not without its merits, if only because its themes and messages are unfortunately super relevant.
Super relevant to this day. I'm just gonna go ahead and try to break the tension by finding a quote that Xandy had in my notes that I wanted to share with everyone.
Please do.
Where is it? Oh god, I need something funny. Here it is. Xandy, I like how they're showing it's a busy New York office by having typewriter noises and car honks in the hallway.
Let's talk about Anne. Anne's a delight.
Anne is a delight. I like Anne a lot. And Celeste Holm is very good as her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, yeah, why wasn't this movie about her?
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't this movie about her?
Because then it's got to be about Gregory Peck. It's got to be...
I know.
I mean...
Listen, I'm never mad when Gregory Peck is on screen, because as it turns out, as I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, Gregory Peck is actually quite attractive on top of being a great actor.
Mm-hmm.
But...
he is quite handsome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was going to say that I was just sort of like looking over the Oscars that it won, and one of the people who it beat is Ethel Barrymore, that Celeste Holm beat for the Oscar. Also, here's another connection that I wanted to bring up here. So it lost Best Writing Screenplay to previous episode, Miracle on 34th Street. But Elia Kazan had another movie nominated that year, which is Boomerang. Xandy, would you kind of talk a little about Boomerang?
Boomerang was about a court case where a priest was murdered in Bridgeport. I think in the movie it wasn't set there.
It was set to Stanford, yeah.
But it was a real case from Bridgeport, Connecticut, where my great-grandfather was a judge later in life. But I don't know what role he had. I know that he was a lawyer and he worked on the case, but I don't know. I did not find the whole connection out last night in preparation for today.
Bummer.
We did, however, look for Kazan in the yearbook of my great-grandfather's little brother. But it was only the law school yearbook from Yale, so we didn't have like the whole
Oh.
all the pictures. But they might have known each other. It's possible. Like, maybe I'd like to believe that maybe they met at the Yale Club one day, or saw somewhere in the bulletin like this case was happening, and maybe it was like, oh, I'll make a movie out of that. But yeah. And it's interesting because, again, it's another story about a Catholic priest. And at the time, Catholics were in the group of people who were kind of like ostracized from society, at least in that area, just in Darien and New Canaan, honestly. But that was a real thing, that Catholics also weren't considered mainstream Americans.
Yeah, with Con, we are recording this 3 hours before the Oscars, before the 97th Academy Award ceremony begins. And so, like, it's extremely interesting. Catholics occupy this extremely odd space where, like, depending on the context, they can be extremely oppressed or the oppressor, depending on where they are. I was just thinking about that with, like, because, you think about Catholics in Ireland or in Scotland in the, 1500s or whatever, and then you think about the Catholic Church, like, nowadays, and you're like, I might be completely out of talking points unless I wanted to look over the movies it beat for a picture. I don't think I've seen any of these except for Miracle on 34th Street. Maybe I'll force Jazz to cover Great Expectations sometime.
So one of the funniest things, though, when that conversation was happening about that's why you have so much energy to get upset all the time, was that I had that literal same conversation with one of Ellie's friends about anti-Semitism and getting outraged after his fiance converted, and she was like kind of like upset all the time about how people were reacting to things she said, or like the news that she had converted, and all sorts of things in her life. And it was just super funny because I thought it was a joke. I laughed at that line. I thought it was the funniest part of the movie. Ellie didn't think that. I don't think Ellie saw it as funny.
I did see it as, I mean, like, I see it as funny because, and we're going to be, I'm going to put this here slightly separate physically so that I can edit this out. We're kind of stalling a little bit because Jazz screen fucked up,
Okay.
but I did see it as funny, but it's like, it's darkly funny. Yeah, Jazz will be back in just a second.
Okay.
Because, how do I put this? It honestly kind of reminds me of how, you know, how when I first transitioned and I started experiencing a lot of like sexual harassment or condescension, a lot of women were kind of like, "Oh, that you just kind of get used to that. You know, you're new to this, so you're still up in arms about it." And I'm just kind of like, part of me understands that, you know, it's hard to like find a way to get up in arms every time a dude is shittier to you about something than he would be to another guy. But like, man, sometimes it's got to happen or it just keeps happening. You know what I mean?
Kind of, but like again, it is one of those situations where like oftentimes there's no one to get upset at.
Mm-hmm.
But and honestly, oftentimes in a similar way, it's literally not based in fact. People physically profile.
Mm-hmm.
Like people have such weird ideas about what people look like, and it's very, your environment that you're in is going to affect how people react to you. Like I thought that I had really unusually curly hair until I went to summer camp with other Jewish people and realized that I actually had straight hair. And there were just like literally nobody in my class at school who, excluding the Jewish kids and the black kids,
Mm-hmm.
had curly hair. That was like they thought I had curly hair because none of them had even wavy hair.
I was gonna say, apparently, according to Wikipedia, this was controversial for being similar to another film about anti-Semitism, which came out the same year, Crossfire, which made me look around the rest of the
Wait,
what?
I think that sounds familiar.
Would you like me to look into it? I was just gonna say, as might amuse you, one of the other movies that was not one of the movies that was nominated for best sound recording was a movie that was, I guess, about you. It's called T-Men. No, okay, I tried.
Oh, I get it.
There we go. There, I mean, like, it was a weird year. I say this every year because I'm a hack. A lot of the movies here have aged kind of weirdly. Notably, besides Miracle on 34th Street, which aged like fine wine. Notably, what movie do you think won best original song, my love?
Best original song of 1947.
Hmm.
Is it something from Miracle on 34th Street?
It is not. It is a song that I guarantee you've heard.
Yeah, but I can't pick something out by ear.
It is Zippity Doo from Song of the South,
Oh, okay.
aged oddly.
I honestly am not even familiar because that was so not part of Disney's thing by the time I was born.
I mean, like, Song of the South's kind of weird because it was like the basis for a major ride for a very long time, and also, you know, Zippity Doo Dah is still a very famous song, but also they just won't admit that movie exists. They're just like, no.
I think so. I'm gonna say one interesting thing would be to see this movie Crossfire
Hmm.
and evaluate which one has aged better because it, just from the description, it sounds more like Crossfire was like exploitative
Hmm.
rather than instructive, but I don't really know.
Yeah, I kind of like want to wait a minute to see if we can get Jazz back to respond to any of this.
Hi, what I miss?
We chatted a little bit. I mentioned that the best original song winner was. We were just talking about how some of the movies from this year aged kind of weirdly, because you have stuff like Miracle on 34th Street and Black Narcissus, which have aged extremely well, and then you have Song of the South or this, which have aged kind of oddly. I'd say this has aged better than Song of the South.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I mean, have the you two actually seen Song of the South?
No.
Yes,
Okay.
I saw it when I was very young.
Yeah, found I found a secret Netflix copy of it at one point in my teen years, and I was just like, you know what? I want to see what all the fuss is about. And I was so bored.
What I just that doesn't surprise me because if it were that interesting and popular, we know that people would never have let it actually be like erased from Disney's whatever. It would still be more like it would be everywhere. Is it everywhere? Am I just stupid about that? Because I don't know Disney stuff.
There's a whole ass movement trying to bring it back as not even from like the right wingers whining. No, this is from people who want to use it as kind of an educational piece almost. Just be kind of like, hey,
Oh, well, that makes sense.
this shit was acceptable at one point. Let's talk about it instead of trying to bury it.
I mean, that's sort of like my position on a lot of stuff. Like, you know, it's sitting there. It won Best Original Song. We can never make it not that.
Especially since Zippity Doo Dah is unfortunately an eternal earworm.
Hmm. It honestly kind of reminds me a lot of Birth of a Nation. You hear that it was the first ever feature length film to use this or that technique. None of that's true. It's not the first ever feature length film, and it's not even inventing any of the techniques it invented. And then you also hear, which is true, that it's a viciously bigoted screed of a movie, which it very much is. That is very true. But then I had to watch it for film class during my attempt at film school, and holy shit, it's so fucking boring. The parts where it's like the most insanely bigoted thing you've ever seen in your life are the parts where you're awake because you're cringing in your seat. The rest of it, it's just so boring. And like you're right. Song of the South is really boring. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I'll give it this. This movie's better than that. It's very competently made. It actually has shit to say. Great acting for the most part.
Hmm. I think I, I think that like if I were to a couple days ago, some website someone posted in one of my discords a list of like the every Best Picture winner ranked. You know, all 96 of them, soon to be 97, and this one ranked very low, and like that was before I watched it, so that made me extremely nervous, and like I think I would raise it higher than that person did. Like I would put it ahead of Green Book. It's better than Green Book, which honestly we should all be extremely ashamed that we let Green Book happen. It's it's better. It's more interesting than Coda, which is a movie, a series of images arranged. I'm being mean. It's fine.
At least it gave Daniel Durant an Oscar winning picture to be in.
Yeah, we'll give him that.
I like Daniel Durant.
We like Daniel Durant in this house, but like I will give this movie that I feel like it was important at the time.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'd recommend it fresh now as a tool to fight bigotry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like it's an interesting thing to watch now because again, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. I guess it is unfortunately still very relevant, but again, in a time where we are still kind of dealing with journalists kind of doing these oppression cosplays, as I put it earlier, we're still dealing with that. I just think it sends me personally, I just could not get into it because okay, but everything you're dealing with in this movie is self-inflicted, sir, to a certain degree, to the point where it hurt your son, who
Mm-hmm.
and like for the most part you're actually really his character is actually a really good parent. Like he's honest with his kid. He he speaks to him like he's a human being, but then you have stuff like that and it's just like, ah.
But that's addressed in the film twice.
It is.
So, like, there's the first part that it's addressed. They're at the party at Anne's house, and they meet the scientist, and he explains, like, why don't we just all, like, just if it's a religion, why don't we just give it up? But if we give it up, then they think of us this way, and then it's our ethnicity, even though it's more than that, and then, like, blah blah blah, all these things. And I wouldn't be Jewish, except the bigots make me want to be proud of it, right?
Mhm.
That's number one, is that the dismissal of anti-Semitism is often, but it's not a permanent attribute. And so to have, in a lot of cases, I would say it's not good to cosplay as something that you're not. But the reality of it is that he could have gone and studied, asked the rabbi 3 times, studied what he needed to do, and it would have been his problem, right?
Well, yes.
And that makes it kind of a different category than a lot of these, like, cosplay situations. Like, it's very much different than, like, blackface. Like, or even, I don't know why there was this time period where people were like, well, it's not blackface because we're, like, literally putting you in a costume to look black. Like, that's still, anyway.
Yike.
That's literally, you literally just said it.
Well, no, because, like, when I talk about blackface in media, I am pretty careful to usually separate what is offensive racial impersonation and what is, like, a minstrel show, right? Especially when we're talking about old movies. Like, there's a difference between, like, blackface as the entertainment thing, which is offensive, and blackface as, like, racial cosplay. They're both offensive, but they're different and distinct things, right?
I mean, yeah.
But, like, the other place that it was addressed is that when the intervention comes finally from the friend, like, you don't have to do this anymore, as soon as the kid is harmed, right? Basically saying, like, you've gone beyond what you should have probably done with this because now others are being drawn in. But at the same time, again, it's one of those situations where, like, bigotry is not tied to the reality of a person's identity. It's tied to perception.
I guess.
And I think that sometimes we lose sight of that, is that it does harm a lot of people, and all you need to do is to be perceived a certain way.
And that's fair, but that's still not the same thing. And ironically, while yes, your 2 examples of, dressing up as a different race versus actual minstrel shows, they are 2 different things. But the fact is, I feel like their impact is still, like, how do I put this? Like, I think that distinguishing them doesn't do us any favors, I guess is my point.
Only in the sense of distinguishing media representation of these things. I'm not trying to say that they're, like, drastically different, but, like, every once in a while something will be racially offensive and someone will say, like, oh, that's, like, a certain kind of, like, it's a minstrel show reference, and it's like, no, just because someone has dressed up as a black person in an offensive way, it does not make it a callback to a certain thing that's still considered offensive. But, like, it's 2 distinct situations. Like, and as someone, like, I think it's important to be as factual about stuff that I don't know about as I can be, and since it's not my lane to be distinguishing what kind of harm is done in each situation, I don't like to conflate those 2 things, because, like, I don't know if they're supposed to be or not. It's not up to me to decide either.
No, it is not. Like, it's barely even for me to decide because I am very white passing, but me personally, it's still coming off as, okay, sounds like you hate people that look like that, including people in my very family. So it doesn't really matter to me which it is. The impact is still very much you are making a caricature of people that I care about.
Yeah, I think the case that I've had to step in and correct someone on that, though, is that oftentimes people will call something blackface when it was, like, a specific example of something from British media, and it was really more of, like, they were making fun of Indian people in an inappropriate way, and I was like, hold on.
Okay, and that's fair.
Just because it's dark skin cosplay it's bad, but like,
Hey, that's just called being Justin Trudeau.
I actually would argue that it's worse when British people use it against someone that they are formerly
exploiting,
colonizers of that land, than British people making fun of an American, like, out of date, offensive entertainment thing. Like, so, like, sometimes it is important.
I do think that there is a distinction between, like, you know, between a minstrel show and, like, Natalie Wood playing Maria in West Side Story, to bring this back around to an Oscar winning film.
Still not great.
Still not great. Not my place to say in either case.
But it's good to be specific so that the people who are in the position to say exactly why it's offensive and how have the real
fact
info. Like,
that's fair.
Like, when I say it's not my place to say, it's like, it's my place to put that information out there and say, I don't know, you tell me. Here's what I saw, right? So I'm going to try and give an accurate view of what I saw.
Yeah.
Not like, I think it was racial bias and no further, like, info, but...
To end on a slightly lighter note, I do want to say, as much as, you know, I'm still conflicted on this film. I don't do what our friend Sam does, like, is the Force with it? I don't know where I'd land if the Force is with this or not. I will, however, say the line from the kid, and no one hates us because we're Americans, got a full-out laugh from me.
It's like, oh, honey.
Yeah. Jasmine, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Sure do. I'm the host of An Eat Retelling, the podcast where we explore all the ways old tales are made new. There was a scene in this movie in which they referenced Atlas, and I was just like, oh no, did I just find another stealth possibility? Fortunately, no. That was the only reference to Atlas we got. Thank God. And so, yeah, please follow us on the podcatcher of your choice. We've got a lot going on in March, and you can find me at Faye Riviera on all the socials.
Is that not the statue that's in 30 Rockefeller, Xandy?
It's near Rockefeller Center. I don't know if it's the one I don't know if that's the entrance to the building.
Okay.
It could be. I just have never gone into that building.
Xandy, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Ellie?
Yes, my love?
Is that where I'm supposed to put that I have a YouTube channel?
Yes. You plug your work. You can go and do that right now if you wish, in fact.
I just have to look it up.
I mean, you can plug your YouTube channel, your socials, your Insta, whatever you like. As I said, I think you have more followers than...
Ellie, I have a question about my YouTube channel.
Yes, my love?
What is it called?
Let me look.
Is it literally my name?
It might be.
If I turn on the camera, can you see it?
It is literally just Xandy Peters YouTube. Yes.
Okay.
Much like all of your social media, it's just under your name.
Okay, then. And if you're interested in following me on social media, I'm Xandy Peters, that's with an X. Almost everywhere online. My YouTube channel is Xandy Peters, my Instagram is Xandy Peters, and my TikTok is Xandy.Peters.
As always, you can find me, Ellie, on Tumblr at Football in Tuxedos with dashes between the words. You can find me on Blue Sky, Medium, and Letterboxd at LSR42. And you can find this podcast on Blue Sky at Biggest Night Pod. We are available on both Spotify and YouTube. And if you follow us on YouTube, be sure to give us a subscribe, maybe like and comment on the videos so that you can tell me which parts you like and which parts you don't. And thanks to both Jasmine and Xandy for coming out today. We had a great discussion, I feel.
Yes, I hope I didn't come off as too much of an asshole.
You not at all. You shut up. You're going to be nice to my friend, okay?
Nah.
But I hope you join it. I'm getting really tired of the movies we're covering being huge downers. So we are starting to lighten up a little bit. When we're covering next week, we're covering a movie starring Humphrey Bogart and directed by John Huston. No, not that one. No, not that one either. No, not that one either. We're covering Key Largo, the 1948 film noir. Hope to see you there.